Wherever you are in the world, welcome to another edition of My Take on China, and today I'm just going to come right out and say it. The United States is a rogue nation. 3 unrelated statements that will change the way we look at the United States forever, or at least they should if we're paying attention. The first one was from Nikki Haley, a presidential candidate who called for the invasion of Iraq and Syria, as well as the taking out of the leaders of these 2 countries and Iran. Then it was Jake Sullivan. And when a senior State Department official announces that over the decades the United States has tried to change the People's Republic of China and has failed, then we know there's a problem. And then Joe Biden came out onto the White House lawn and he was asked, "Do you hold Iran responsible for the deaths of 3 Americans?" His answer was, "I do hold them responsible in the sense that they were the ones supplying the weapons to the people who did it." That's a damning statement. These 3 unrelated sentences, one of them from a person on entirely the opposite side of the political spectrum, all point to a very disturbing conclusion. The United States is a rogue nation. Now, this is a damning statement to make, and it shouldn't be made lightly. There are many in the USA, particularly in the current administration, who would argue with me, but it's very difficult to argue with facts, and the facts that stack up. Stating the USA as a rogue state is not simply an allegation, and that's one thing the US very cleverly does. It presents allegations against its adversaries, but it rarely presents evidence to support the allegations. In this case, I'll show you there is much evidence to support the allegation, and these 3 statements prove much of the evidence is actually from the very mouths of the people who would argue they're not a rogue state. Their words say differently. These 3 statements are not isolated incidents. Many other examples can be found on videos, in interviews, in articles, in the actions of the people instructed to carry out the bidding of the people making these kinds of statements. These just happen to be 3 recent statements taken by me as examples. They're only indicative of a deeper rot. Hundreds more could have been provided, but for the purpose of proving that the US is a rogue state, these 3 will suffice. The United Nations has a set of international laws. They are the rules that govern how countries behave and act towards each other. The entire purpose of the United Nations, as described in the opening chapter of their charter, which is called Purposes and Principles, is to maintain peace, suppress aggression, and bring about peaceful resolutions. Now, rhetoric in politics is fine. It's perfectly okay for a leader to stand in front of his or her supporters and speak about what they'd like to do. But the actions taken by the supporters are what make these things crimes. If the action is carried out, then the rhetoric is more than just feisty or fiery words. It becomes incitement to commit a crime. And we're seeing this on a daily basis coming out of both sides of the US political spectrum. Aggression is defined by the United Nations as the use of armed force by a state against the sovereignty, territorial integrity, political independence of another state, or in any other manner inconsistent with the Charter of the United States, as set out in the definition. Political interference is also covered by the United Nations in Declaration 2131 on the inadmissibility of intervention in the domestic affairs of states and the protection of their independence and sovereignty, in which it declares that, quote, "Every state has an inalienable right to choose its political, economic, social, and cultural systems without interference in any form by another state." Now, in her call to bomb Iran, Iraq, and take out the leaders, Nikki Haley should be called into the United Nations, where she was once the US ambassador. She should answer questions to what she meant by these statements. Were her words precursors to a war crime? And the simple answer is Yes, they were. Because a few days later, Joe Biden did indeed send US military forces to both Syria and Iraq to do exactly what Haley suggested in the first part of her comment. Are plans in place to carry out the remainder of her comment is something international jurists should be asking. In his statement, when Jake Sullivan said, "We realize that efforts, implied or explicit, to shape or change the PRC over several decades did not succeed," he now admits that the US has interfered in China's political, economic, social, and cultural systems, exactly what Declaration 2131 calls upon members not to do. Now, when Joe Biden said he held Iran responsible for the deaths of 3 Americans because they supplied the weapons, he made a very serious error of judgment, which should be held against him in the international court. But because of a law we know as the Hague Invasion Act, correctly named the American Service Members Protection Act, we know he never will. But in making this statement, he accepts that responsibility of supplying the weapons amounts to culpability in the crime they commit. And yet he continues, contrary to the International Court of Justice's ruling, to continue supplying weapons to Israel in order to assist them in continuing what the ICJ has provisionally declared appears to be a plausible genocide. What's worse, this is not an incremental shift into lawlessness. This is a well-planned shift. The USA refuses to ratify the International Criminal Court. It refuses to ratify the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, and it has enacted a law allowing itself to take whatever means necessary to avoid punishment for breaching those international standards. This is organized crime at a global level. This is why they are a rogue nation. Instead of abiding by recognized international laws, the US has created a new rule book that no one has ever seen called a rules-based order. Now, through this unwritten, undefined system of unknown rules, the USA allows itself to be an aggressor. It allows for its own actions to go unpunished, while at the same time it calls for other nations to be held accountable under the international laws that it has placed itself above. If we take the Oxford Languages definition of a nation or state that is breaking international law and posing a threat to the security of others as our definition, all the evidence suggests this is exactly what the USA is doing. They are a rogue nation. Thanks once again for watching my take on China, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now, but please don't forget to like, share, and check your subscription. See you.